Hello everyone, it's Erin Gabriella. Welcome to my Maya Angelou Akashic record reading. I'm so excited to be doing this one. Thank you to all those who voted for her. I think it was an amazing choice. It took me a long time to get ready to do Maya Angelou because Maya Angelou, like her essence is all about self-worth and self-esteem. And when she was first voted as the next person, I was going through a lot of challenges that was making it hard for me to kind of see my worth and my value. So I had to do a lot of readjusting and cleansing in order to be prepared to really bring her forward the way that she deserves to be. But I'm so happy I've gotten the opportunity to get to know her. She is such a powerful energy, an ancient energy. You know, she obviously did come to this planet with lessons to learn, but I just feel like she was more here as an example. She really just mostly had it together, was already ascended in her own way, and was really just here as an example to the rest of us on how to overcome extreme hardship and still love yourself, and really to be an example for the Black community specifically. I also, through my time learning about her and working with her, have come to know that Maya Angelou and I actually have quite a bit in common. We're both from the Midwest. She was originally from St. Louis. I was born in Salina, Kansas. Both very deep thinkers. We both are writers. Obviously, she is a professional writer. I write mostly for fun, but she has said that she's a big fan of my writing and is encouraging me to write more. So we both express primarily through writing. My default way of channeling is through writing as well, or automatic writing. So for both of us, writing has always been a very key tool of empowerment, a key tool of how we just communicate with the world and express ourselves. Also, both of us are Black women, Black scholars. We were both raised by our grandmothers. We just have so much in common. And we also have some overlapping missions. Like hers was about being a beacon of self-esteem and self-worth, especially for those who society tries to make sure that they don't have any. And mine is a lot about empowerment and staying in your power, which self-esteem plays a big role. And most importantly, our biggest common theme is that we're both Black women who are here to be shining beacons for Black liberation. And I do make a point to say Black liberation specifically. Yes, obviously, I want to be as inclusive as possible, and I do love seeing empowerment in all of its forms across all races, sexes, gender, identities, and I do support all of those. But I came in as a Black woman, and so did Maya Angelou, because we are really here primarily for the Black community and to raise and help elevate the Black community specifically. As I was working with Maya Angelou, her Black power, Black liberation, Black empowerment, Black self-esteem was so critical to her mission, and she's still so passionate about it to this day. It's going to be impossible for me to not talk about race. I think sometimes I am reluctant to talk about it just because racism and race is part of the dualistic nature of Earth, and I really want my presence to just give people the freedom to go beyond even those constructs and those boxes that we put ourselves in. But working with Maya, I realized that obviously, I can't just ignore as well, because then not talking about it for fear of alienating people isn't helping either. It's just important for me to go ahead and state that yes, a big part of her mission and my mission is specifically geared towards Black people, because Black people are who this ascension is primarily for. Not to say that there aren't other people on the planet who are important, but a lot of this mess that's being created, these issues with power, are geared towards Black people. You can kind of tell who the ascension is for, or the people and the energetics or the bloodlines that are important to the ascension, by looking at who's treated the worst in society. Because, for example, it's really important for us to have and embody divine feminine energy for this ascension. That is why like there's so much sexism and terrorism towards women. You know, like the male energy is important, but it's not as important as the feminine in this particular ascension moment. Like we really need that feminine, and that's why the feminine is so often attacked. In the same vein, there are certain souls who have made the choice to incarnate in Black bodies in this lifetime who are like the key beneficiaries primarily of this ascension, and they are who this ascension is for, primarily speaking. So it's really important to just go ahead and say that. And I don't understand why in the spiritual community we can talk about the divine feminine all day long, but we can't talk about the importance of Black people and this ascension without it creating some kind of division. Like, I don't understand that, because they both matter. It's kind of time for us to just own that, because the majority of the spiritual things I see on the internet are primarily white focused and white centric, and I personally feel like that's a large part of the reason why the ascension has kind of been dragging, is because there hasn't been enough focus on the most important group, which is Black people. So that was something, probably one of the biggest things that I personally was able to kind of just shed with talking with Maya, because she was so just very pro Black, and everything about my channeling with her and our conversations that we'll have is just black, and more Black. She made me more comfortable being able to say like, okay, like it's okay to just be about, you know, to be primarily focused on Black people and Black liberation, because that ties in so closely with the liberation of the planet. It's okay to go ahead and dive into the duality of race if that's what's needed and necessary to kind of move everyone forward. So moving forward, you know, I'll be much more comfortable talking about Black people and the ascension as it relates to Black people. But that was just another big thing when I was channeling her that I was very surprised about, because in her lifetime she's kind of marketed as just a person who's kind of like for everyone. And she is, like, just like I am in my own way, but she wrote for Black people, her focus was Black people, she cared deeply about the struggles of Black people, and that was just a passion and still is to this day. So that is a big thing that's coming through. So as we go and dive more deeply into her Akashic records, it's going to relate a lot to Black people, because that's just what she was just so far about in this lifetime, and what we as her viewers can learn the most for. But we, her viewers, can learn from as well. So I am in the park. It's like the middle of the day, so obviously I have some, you know, very harsh lighting in the back, but I have to get this done. And for some reason, every time I try to come and do it, like with my perfect lighting, with my whatever, I hit issues. So this is the only time that I think I'm going to get it done. So let's just do it. Okay, so that just needed to be said up front. So with that, let's jump into Maya Angelou, a little bit more about her Akashic records, her life, and then I'll bring forward a few more pieces of information that she wants to share with us. So with that, I'm trying to dodge the sun. Okay, here we go. So with that in mind, let's jump into Maya Angelou's Akashic records. So the first one that's just jumping right in my face is slavery. Obviously, so here's the deal. Maya Angelou has come from a very royal, it's almost like royal is an understatement, but that's like the only word that I can find, like royal, earthly and galactic bloodline of African origin. I'm seeing her way back, like, I'm hearing like Wakanda style environments still exist, but and the actual one that I'm seeing, it is like much farther back in the past, where these extremely dark, like Nubian beings that are just so beautiful. They have super long necks, like they're just really I'm getting like imams, like a bunch of like imams walking around, who were in kind of I'm getting southern eastern African region, almost like the area around Kenya, but like if you know Africa, maybe like like just above South Africa, like Zimbabwe, parts of South Africa, like over in that area. That's primarily where they lived, and they had a utopia, like just a beautiful, almost like how you maybe would imagine Atlantis kind of environment and society. And I see Maya being a part of like the royal bloodline and living in peace and harmony. And I'm also seeing as well that a lot of those same bloodlines were the bloodlines that were targeted during slavery, specifically and for the most part to this day. So those same bloodlines continue to incarnate throughout Africa. I mean, they spread a little bit through parts of Asia and Europe, but mostly into Africa. And then from there, when the slave trade happened, I'm seeing Maya, I'm still a member of that royal bloodline in a different lifetime, and her tribe being captured and sold. So she had that experience where she was on the ship and experienced those tremendous horrors. And I really don't have words to overstate the gravity of the pain, of the torture, of the psychological trauma that one experienced on those slave ships. I mean, I just can't put it into words. It's a trauma that is very difficult to quantify. It's also important to mention that the bloodline that she was from was a very magical bloodline. So they did do magic. It was certain types of magic that were specific to that ancestral line and that were cultivated within that ancestral line. It was based in a certain type of elemental magic. They focused mostly on ethereal magic. I'm not going to get access to that necessarily because it's for that specific bloodline, but I am a part of I'm in a similar vein. Like I also am from like a royal magic bloodline, not the same as hers, but you know, something in that same vein, which is another similarity that we have in common. But that's important to note, is that her bloodline was also very magical. So she does have a past as more of a priestess than a witch, but she absolutely does understand magic, practices magic, did a certain extent a little bit in her lifetime as Maya Angelou. But you know, her primary magic and her life as Maya Angelou was the magic of the spoken word. So anyway, back to slavery. An important point that Maya has relayed to me that I need to relay to you, that is not in the history books, is that a lot of times the people who were sold off, who they tried to sell off to the white people, were people who were of those magical bloodlines or had some other level of prominence in the tribes that they were a part of, right? So oftentimes, you know, a tribe would go to war to one another. Whichever tribe was lost at that point, they would try to sell off their most powerful people. So they would try to sell off the king and the king's children. They would sell off, if they could, the shamans, the witch doctors, the spiritual leaders. Sometimes the spiritual leaders are obviously older, so, you know, but anyone who showed tremendous promise and who was a threat, they felt, to the power of the conquering tribe were the primary targets. So that would be kings and queens, anyone with any spiritual prowess, really, really strong warriors, musicians, and intellectuals. Those were the big ones that were the ones that they were shipping off and that were being sold off by other African people to the whites. And that's really important because it's just important for everyone to know that for those of you who have had a lifetime where you have been sold off, just know that you were targeted because you were so special and because you were so powerful, not the other way around. Okay, so I've discovered cinematic mode on my phone. I look much better, thank God. Okay, so anyway, continuing, slavery. Okay, so another really important point for Maya specifically, and for anybody else who was of a magical bloodline, such as me, because I also went through the whole slavery ship thing, that we need to know is that slavery and enslavement was done on purpose to specific powerful bloodlines in order to create a frequency of disempowerment within the DNA of those bloodlines. So, sirens. Okay, there's a siren going off. I assume that's because what I'm saying is really important. So anyway, let me just get this out. Okay, yes, a frequency of disempowerment within the DNA, because these bloodlines are so unbelievably powerful that it was scary, not just to other warring tribes, but to certain powers that be, And they really wanted a lot of these most powerful bloodlines out of commission as much as possible, because this kind of ascension battle that's been going on has been going on. It's a long game, I'll put it like that. Several centuries in the making. So a lot of these extremely powerful bloodlines have been taken out of commission temporarily because of the traumas of slavery. And the way that works is slavery is done to trick the mind into thinking that it's enslaved. And you might be thinking like, well, duh, they are enslaved. But the truth of the matter is, like, the soul is always free. I mean, you can trap the body, but this reality that we live in isn't real anyway. So, but the mind transcends any and all. Like, the mind can control universes. So if you can enslave somebody through the physical illusions of this world and convince their mind that they are enslaved, then that belief can carry over indefinitely and will create a pattern of enslavement, indefinitely, which makes a type of slavery that exists beyond the physical, that exists beyond just one lifetime. And that was the whole point, is to try to create a frequency of disempowerment and enslavement that extended indefinitely, as long as it possibly could. It wasn't destined to last forever, but for as long as they could do it. So that's a large part of why, like, slavery happens, is just to trick the mind through the body, the illusions of the body, into thinking that it's not free. And then when that happens, it kind of limits what that energy and that frequency can do, not just in this lifetime, but many lifetimes past, until that belief is cleared. So that is why empowerment is so important. That is why self-esteem is so important, because self-esteem is a critical form of empowerment. It's a way that we can fortify and strengthen ourselves in our empowerment journey. And then once we develop a sense of self-esteem that exists outside of what people tell us, that's self-created, that we've created for ourselves through our own knowing, that can be potentially impenetrable. So any attempts that anyone might try to do to try to tell us that we're not strong, that they're better than us, isn't really going to take hold, because we are strong and empowered within ourselves and feeding ourselves through our own love, as opposed to trying to externally get that love through assimilation into white societies, through assimilation to white gods, etc., which has been what the colonial powers have tried to use to replace a lot of the spiritual leaders that they lost through slavery and those wars. And that frequency of disempowerment that was created made it a little bit easier to do so, because it was like there wasn't as much of a belief in the strength of their own bloodlines and the power of their bloodlines. So it was easier for them to say, like, oh, of course, the white man is better, or of course, like, the white god is better. So it all kind of ties in together. It's also worth mentioning as well that colonialism is, to a certain extent, like a karmic debt that was paid for slavery, because certain areas of Africa lost their power centers, like their power leaders, their intellectual, their spiritual leaders. There wasn't as much resistance to the imposing of white colonialism as there would have been if those people had been there and not had been sold off. Lastly, sometimes the old powers of, like, the royal bloodlines, how do I say this? Okay, have you ever seen those things on TikTok where, like, certain black people are, like, trying to shit on other black people? Like, I've seen these things on TikTok of other black people from other countries shitting on black Americans, making fun of them because they don't know where they're from or whatever. Please know that a lot of that is a relic of tensions that existed during the slavery times, like the very patternings of specialness that caused certain people to get sold off are the very patternings of specialness that will cause, like, black people to attack other black people for having been enslaved. Like, that whole, like, you can tell something's off when you're making fun of somebody for having a history of pain. And that same energy of, like, they can tell that there's royalty there and they can't stand it, so they shit on it. It's creepy, but for some reason I need to make a point to say that, because that's part of the reason why, like, there are certain black people still making fun of black people who have been enslaved, like black Americans and stuff, and making fun of them for not remembering where they're from as if like slavery didn't happen or something. I don't know. Like it's worth noting that that's that same tension between like the special power bloodlines and other bloodlines that are also special but just not quite the same way, you know. That's where that is coming from. Oh, one more thing about the importance of why the slave trade happened was not just to try to disempower these bloodlines. The sun. Oh, I picked the wrong time of day. Okay, hold up. Was not just to hold on. Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted to mention about why slavery happened or why certain bloodlines were targeted wasn't just to try to make them feel disempowered, even though that was a big part of it. It was also to cut them off from being able to do a lot of their traditional practices, especially with the witches that were sold off and the priestesses that were sold off, you know, not being able to access your heritage, cut you off from like the magic of those bloodlines specifically. Like it makes it much harder to access those magical initiations because you're not with your tribe for them to pass those down. So that was another really big thing, is just to try to cut off or limit the magic, which can never really be done, but you can forget, and that can definitely slow you down. Okay, so everything that I covered is a lot, but that's what I picked up primarily from her past life as a slave, as a magical being from a power bloodline in Africa who did a very special, you know, intertribal type of magic. Her other lifetimes that she's showing me are also her just as a Black person. She also, as an ancient soul, had lifetimes other places in other galaxies, but every time I try to get too far into them, I just kind of get like dragged back into her Black lifetimes. At least this time, for this particular video that I'm doing, she doesn't really want me paying attention to anything outside of the Blackness. So it's mostly just lifetimes of her in Africa, lifetimes of her doing magic as an African priestess, being initiated into African priestessdom, and also her lifetime as a slave. So let's just jump forward into her lifetime as Maya. So for the first part of Maya's life, she was raised by her grandmother. She did kind of grow up with quite a bit of trauma throughout her years. She was born in St. Louis and then went to live with her grandma, and then she went to go live with her mother for a short time, and then she was sexually assaulted, then went back to live with her grandma. She took a series of odd jobs before she became a professional writer, which included prostitution. And it's worth noting, during all of these moments in her different part of her life, traveling around the Midwest and all the stuff that she's been through, it happened deliberately to help her fortify her own like empowerment and self-esteem. Because Maya Angelou has kind of seen the cotton pickers, she's, you know, seen the prostitutes or been one, she's always had a first-hand view of society's underbellies, like the people or the professions that, you know, nobody else goes and talks to, that nobody else maybe thinks is important. She's always been on the front lines of that, and she's always just been a champion in her own way of the downtrodden or like the underbelly, because of her lifetime, which has allowed her to garner so much sympathy for people who are in those positions and to occasionally have lived those lives as well. It's also for her to have fortified her own self-esteem. So, and this is something that I've learned that I was kind of going through when this was first voted in, like the Maya Angelou thing, was that self-esteem is really something that comes from within. That does sound like a cliche, but you don't really know it until you live it, until you lose everything, or you end up taking a job that you think is embarrassing to take, or you get dishonored in some kind of way that you really realize that actually it's not at all about, you know, the accolades or the money. It's really just about my sense of self, and if I can look in the mirror and like what I see. And the entire first part of her life was about cultivating that love from within, despite any challenges that she would have experienced in her external reality. She struggled to feel powerful for a very long time because of some of the abuses that she did go through. And especially with her voice, like the power of the voice and the power of the word through voice was something specifically that she always struggled with, especially in her early years. Like, she defaulted to writing all of the time. Part of that was a contract to just make sure that she got on the path of being a professional writer, but part of that was a personal struggle with the throat chakra and just being able to claim her full empowerment as a woman and as a Black woman in this world. Her presence on this earth was meant to show other Black people a template for how to throw off the shackles of degradation that society and white people try to place on them. And that's why she chose to incarnate as Black and to see the aspects of Black American life from so many different angles. Also wants me to just kind of outline some of the different perceptions of Black people and how they're nonsensical. So I'll just go ahead and do that, because she wants me to kind of drive home that these perceptions that society puts on Black people is literally just a mass projection of like the white shadow. So of course we live in a dualistic world. You know, we have male, female, we have white, Black, and the whole illusion around race was to kind of create this fake dualistic structure between light and shadow, and try to make that something that's external as opposed to something that's external and something that exists within society at large, as opposed to something that's internal and exists within each person. So the attempt at race and the creation of race and racism is a mass attempt to ignore the deep spiritual inner work that everyone has to do within themselves by pretending that there are certain people that are white and therefore born angelic, and certain people that are Black and therefore born in the shadow. So that kind of allows white people, the ones that want to subscribe to that illusion, to completely pretend like they don't have a shadow and that they have nothing to work on, or that everything they do is just the shit because they were like born white, which is an extreme spiritual ineptitude. Like, that's extremely dangerous to do spiritually, is pretend that you have no shadow that needs to be worked on. And instead of encouraging like white people in the larger white society to work on itself, to continually project their shadow onto people of a darker hue and pretend that because they're brown that somehow they represent like their shadow. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but that's what's happening. And then on like the Black side is to kind of pretend that, you know, they are the embodiment of evil or whatever, which is just complete crap, because obviously they have a light side too. So it hurts everyone. I was supposed to outline that and then take a moment to just talk about the different lies, like the big lies that are kind of told about Black people in general, or that have been stereotypes of Black people throughout history. Because just to know that it's like all primarily from a societal perspective, just stuff that exists within white people that they don't want to look at. So the first one is laziness. That doesn't make sense, because lazy was a term that was commonly thrown at Black slaves who like didn't obviously want to be slaves. So they kind of, and were being overworked anyway. And then it's not really a rebuttal, but it's just more of a clapback that I'll just post here, is like, it was kind of like white people who were aspiring to doing nothing. Like, that's why they were sitting in the big house doing nothing where everyone else worked. Like, that is pretty lazy. But when it's done by white people, it's called capitalism or genius. That was one. The other one is angry, like Black, angry Black, whatever. Please note that racism requires rage. Like, you can't be racist and happy at the same time. I've never met a happy racist. Like, anger and rage is a requirement for racism, and that's a projection. Like, the whole like, let's deny the Black experience by calling them angry Black people, that's a projection of their own violent anger and also jealousy. So violence is in every society, but this stereotype is coming mostly out of a mass shame on behalf of white people for their barbarism towards Black people and indigenous people. They know what they did was wrong, but don't care enough to stop, but have a shame about it, but aren't willing to like claim that shame, a lot of them. And I'm talking collectively. So if, you know, you're a white person working on yourself, then great, but just collectively this is still going on. And the other one is stupid or not as smart, right? So this is a stereotype, a narcissistic belief that everyone who doesn't agree with white supremacy or the white way or isn't a part of white society inherently is not as intelligent. It's just a false narcissistic belief system that we're all now learning is untrue, right? So I was supposed to outline those. What else? And her also to note that her life is meant to be a huge rejection of those projections, right? Because she was a tremendous scholar. She was happy, you know. And that is really where the importance, again, of self-esteem and self-worth comes in, because when you are able to think for yourself and make your own decisions about who you are and what you're about, it makes it a lot easier for you to reject other people's projections that they're trying to put on you. So that is why Maya Angelou really believes that Black self-esteem is one of the hallmarks of the liberation movement, and one of the key ingredients to helping individuals throw off these larger societal dynamics and stop trying to accidentally through these programmings internalize the shadow of society at large, because that's just not their role. It's inappropriate to ask, but to a certain extent that's kind of the design of race and racism in America right now and in the world at large. So to wrap, I think I've covered a lot of what I wanted to cover. Let me just check my notes. Yeah, and that's just the biggest message that I'm supposed to be portraying specifically to Black people, is that you don't have to accept other people's opinions of who you are, who you're about, and what your culture is or is not about, or whether or not you have one or whatever. Remember that you're capable. Focus on your own perspective. Focus on developing your own perspective and diving deep into your own perspective and trusting yourself and your judgment above all. And once you form that opinion of yourself, make sure that it's beautiful and positive, because the truth is love. So if your opinion of yourself is not loving, it's not true, period. And that goes for everyone of any race. So make sure that your opinion of yourself is loving. Make sure it's your own and not something that other people are pushing onto you. And once you develop your own individualized, loving opinion of yourself that you formed alone, hold on to that and protect it for everything that it's worth, because that's what's really going to be your saving grace in life's hard situations. Yeah. Because your sense of self is not anyone else's business, and it's certainly not anyone else's place to try to destroy that just because they're insecure or want to control you. So that is really it. I know we spent a lot of time on general concepts, but again, Maya is an academic, so that's just the way that it went. But I think that it was very informative, and maybe one day we'll learn a little bit more. My name is Erin Gabriella. Thank you so much. I do offer Akashic record readings if you would like a look into your own past lives. We can look at any lifetime that makes sense for you, slavery or otherwise. My website is currently down, but if you want to, just DM me for now, and I'll send you the link to my booking page. Thanks so much. Have a great day.